How are y'all guys doing? Good night. Let's set up here. I am Lance Myers. I've been a professional animator for 17 years. I started out in feature films. I worked on Space Jam, Anastasia, Quest for Camelot, Prince of Egypt, and I was a lead animator on A Scanner Darkly. I also have worked in the gaming industry here in town, worked at probably half of those companies that he talked about laying people off. I've been there. Worked at Human Code, Acclaim, where I worked on Turok and NBA Jam, Fizz Factor, BioWare, worked on SWTOR, and I currently work at Spacetime Studios, where we do phone and PC titles. Those are my day jobs. That's my day job career, so to speak. But I'm here to talk about what I do in my spare time, which is make short animated films. And specifically, with regard to the short animated films, I'd like to talk to you about three things: what the genre means to me, artistically speaking, what I've been able to accomplish with the medium, and briefly go over my process with you and how I make these films. So going back to when I began in the feature film area, I was lucky enough to find a studio that would kind of give me on-the-job training. So I entered into the industry as an in-between cleanup artist working on paper, stacks of paper at a drawing table, old school way, and worked really hard for a time to figure out that craft, just being around the people that do it and following them up and cleaning up their work. And you know, it's a pretty labor-intensive craft. And so I worked really hard at it, moved up from the cleanup department into being an assistant animator, and then eventually an animator. And you know, it was a lot of hard work. And what it felt like after a time, I really started to kind of hunger to make my own animated cartoons. It felt like what I was doing was maybe, you know, learning a really beautiful foreign language. You know, spending years perfecting, you know, and learning this language, only to spend my time sort of transcribing what other people want to write. And the poet in me wanted to write my own poetry with this new language. So, I decided at a certain point that I was going to go ahead and just really try to make my own animated short with this thing, with this craft that I was learning. And at the time, I had stumbled upon a brilliant new software called Flash. This was '99, and Flash really sped up the process and sort of made it possible. So I wrote about a 3-minute script, started making my own film, and about 2 years later I had a film. And you know, this was before YouTube, so I had no way to get an audience for it. But I really wanted an audience for it. I felt like if I could at least show it somewhere one time in front of an audience, it would make it worth my time and effort. So I sort of did this shotgun approach and sent it out to, you know, must have been over 50 film festivals across the world. And my goal was, if I can just show it one place to one audience, that my job there is done. And sure enough, I came back, and at least over half of those festivals took it, screened it. It wound up screening across the world. It debuted at South by Southwest. I was approached by a distributor. Through that distributor, it showed on HBO, PBS, a channel in Canada called Moviola, the Directors Guild Theater in LA, and the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. And I was like, wow, hey, I got an audience. That's great. I think the distributor paid me like $500 for it. So, you know, it's like for a 2-year project, getting $500, it's not really commercially viable. But people saw it, and I was thrilled. So I started making another, and another, and another. And I'm still making them. I'm now working on my 13th animated short. And over the years, I've sort of you know, figured out the angles a little bit. I have a really good relationship with a London distributor now. They represent 3 of my films, and I get a sales report from them every 6 months and make $200-300. Again, not great money, but people are seeing them. The only time I ever made any kind of good money, I did wind up selling a block of 6 animated shorts to Adult Swim as a web series for a while. And that was great money. But the general rule of thumb, I mean, for me, it's not about the money. It's not, and it really isn't, because it's not something I could live on. But it's very satisfying as an artist to write something, to spend your time doing it your way, and then having people appreciate it and want to see it, and it finding an audience. So that's what the genre means to me artistically, and that's what I've been able to accomplish with it over the years. So now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my process. Hey, did it right. And this is how I approach it. This is how I learned from being in a studio and seeing their process. And I've sort of co-opted this for my own personal use. And I don't always follow this just exact, but it's basically how I approach each one. So obviously every movie starts with a script or story. And I know that there are projects and people and studios out there who sometimes mix the story writing with the storyboarding. And this works really well with visual storytelling, where a lot of visual gags or a lot of action-oriented stuff. I've never been able to really work that way. So I usually start with the written word, the written script, and a lot of times I'll have ideas in my head visually what I'd like that to be like when it plays out, but I usually start with a written script, and at the same time also doing some concept art, designing the characters, coming up with a visual style, visual approach for it. And then I'll record the voices, and I'll have a pretty good idea of what each character needs to be like. I'm lucky enough to have formed some great working relationships with a lot of actors here in town who are really talented. And so we'll go in the studio, record the voices, take usually a WAV file away from the studio, import that into Premiere, and use that to cut that up and create what is essentially a radio play. So you can listen to the whole thing from start to finish. And I put that together in Adobe's Premiere. Then I'll take that out of Premiere. That Premiere file will become my master editing file, so I'll save that. But I'll export the WAV file from Premiere and bring that into Flash, and that's where I do my storyboarding. But I use that term lightly because I don't do storyboarding proper. I think storyboarding is a fantastic, very useful process, and there's sort of a continuum where there's storyboarding here and there's finished animation here. And what I usually do in Flash is go directly to somewhere in here, which is more like an animatic. An animatic is essentially storyboards timed out to the audio with little bits of animation here and there just to get the gist across. So I'll take that audio that I've imported into Flash, just dive directly into creating my animatic, which is rough animation. And then once I have that put together, where you can watch the film basically from start to finish, and you're seeing just limited bits of animation. And once that's done, then I'll bring that back into Premiere, and that's, again, my master audio, or my master edit file. And then one by one, take each shot, paint the backgrounds, do the finished animation in Flash, and one by one, spend a lot of time on each little shot, polishing it up, getting it just right, export that, and put it back into Premiere. And that, one by one, I'm replacing those rough shots with finished work. Sometimes I'll be using After Effects to get nice camera moves, to do some compositing with the backgrounds, to add in certain visual effects. But that's basically my process. So I'm animating in Flash, compositing After Effects, eventually dumping everything back into that master Premiere file, eventually rendering that out as my QuickTime, and then go have a party, because it's done. So that's my process. It's worked well for me, and I think, every film I've ever made for myself has been mostly 2D work, but I think this process would work just fine in the 3D process as well. Of course, a few software shifts, but I think it would work fine. This is kind of the process I've used to create some of the work that I've worked on for freelance projects, for for the studios I've done. I've done storyboarding for BioWare doing the Star Wars game. I've had music videos, educational videos that I create, and it's all been through what I've learned just creating my own films. So, it's been a great process. Learning some sort of technique at a studio, that's a great experience because I'm in among other artists who are doing things and, experimenting with new techniques. And at a studio, a lot of times you're exposed to the new technology that's coming down the pipe and people are trying new things. And then every time I learn a new technique, I can sort of try to integrate that back into my own personal work and vice versa. So I've learned a lot doing it. It's kept me nimble, and looks like I've spoken more than 10 minutes. Well, good. I'm wrapping up then. If you ever get the urge to make something, make an animated film and go see film festivals. Thank you.